If a dog refuses to enter a place, it is never just instinct. It is memory trying to speak. The words echo through the mind of retired United States Marine veteran Ethan Cole as he stands at the edge of an abandoned railway line deep in the outskirts of a forgotten American valley. The morning air is cold and still, carrying the faint metallic scent of old iron and damp stone. Ahead of him, half hidden by overgrown brush and collapsed fencing, the entrance to the tunnel sits like a wound in the earth, dark and unmoving, swallowed by decades of neglect. Beside him stands Shadow, a full-body German shepherd with a black and tan coat, intelligent amber eyes, and a posture that is unusually rigid. He is not pacing. He is not curious. He is refusing. Ethan tightens his grip on the leash, but Shadow does not move forward. Instead, the dog plants his paws firmly into the gravel, head lowered slightly, eyes locked into the darkness beyond the tunnel entrance. There is no barking, no aggression, only a deep and unsettling stillness that feels deliberate, almost purposeful. Ethan exhales slowly, scanning the surroundings. Old railroad tracks stretch into the tunnel like broken memories, rusted and partially buried beneath dirt and vines. A faded warning sign hangs crookedly on one side, its paint peeled away by time and weather. Ethan has walked abandoned places before during his service years, places marked by silence and loss, but this feels different. Shadow suddenly shifts his weight, stepping one pace forward, then immediately stepping back again, as if testing an invisible boundary. Ethan kneels beside him, voice low and calm, asking what he sees that he does not. The German shepherd does not respond to the voice. Instead, his ears twitch sharply, reacting to something deeper inside the tunnel, something that does not belong to the present moment. A faint breeze escapes from the tunnel entrance, carrying a sound so subtle it could almost be mistaken for wind passing through hollow stone. But Shadow reacts instantly. His body stiffens, his gaze sharpening with absolute focus. Ethan rises slowly, instinct overriding caution as he reaches for the flashlight clipped to his belt. The beam cuts through the darkness, revealing only fragments of decayed railway structure and dripping moisture along the tunnel walls. Yet Shadow remains fixed, unmoving, as if he is listening to something Ethan cannot hear. A memory, perhaps, or something that refuses to stay buried. Ethan takes one step forward, then another, stopping just behind the threshold of darkness. Shadow growls softly, not in warning, but in recognition. It is a sound that carries weight, as if the dog has heard this place before, or something within it remembers him. Ethan pauses, looking down at his companion, realizing that whatever lies inside this abandoned tunnel is not simply forgotten infrastructure. It is something that still echoes, and Shadow is the only one who recognizes its voice. The silence inside the abandoned tunnel feels heavier the moment Ethan Cole crosses the threshold. The beam of his flashlight cuts through the darkness in short, controlled movements, revealing uneven railroad ties, broken stone edges, and streaks of moisture running down the curved concrete walls. The air is colder here, not naturally cold, but trapped cold, as if the tunnel has been holding its breath for years. Behind him, Shadow refuses to follow fully inside. The German shepherd stands at the entrance, half in light, half in shadow, body tense but controlled, eyes locked deep into the tunnel where Ethan's light cannot fully reach. Ethan pauses, listening. At first there is nothing, only the distant drip of water echoing through the hollow passage. Then it comes again, faint and irregular, a sound that does not belong to the natural rhythm of an empty structure. It is not wind. It is not metal settling. It is something more deliberate, almost like a pattern trying to repeat itself. Shadow reacts instantly, stepping one pace forward, then stopping again, his ears shifting sharply as if triangulating direction. Ethan lowers his flashlight slightly, scanning the ground. Near the edge of the rail line, he notices something that breaks the expectation of abandonment. Fresh scuff marks. Not old decay, not erosion, but recent disturbance in the dust. He crouches, tracing the marks with his fingers. They are not random. They move in a directional pattern, as if something or someone had been dragged or guided deeper into the tunnel. A quiet tension settles into his posture. Shadow lets out a low breath-like sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, but something restrained and urgent. Ethan looks back at him. "You hear it too," he whispers, though he does not expect an answer. The flashlight beam shifts again, revealing a small object caught between broken sleepers near the wall. Ethan carefully reaches forward and retrieves it. It is a worn fragment of fabric attached to a rusted metal clip, the kind used in old rail worker equipment or emergency tagging systems. Time has faded its color, but it is not ancient. It has been here long enough to be forgotten, but not long enough to belong to history. Shadow suddenly steps forward without hesitation this time, crossing fully into the tunnel for the first time. His movement is steady, purposeful, no longer resisting. Ethan rises immediately, following him deeper into the darkness. The tunnel begins to narrow slightly, the air becoming heavier, sound behaving differently, as if absorbed rather than reflected. Every step forward feels like moving further into something that has been waiting rather than abandoned. Shadow stops again, this time not at the entrance, but deeper inside, directly beneath a section of ceiling where old support beams intersect. He lifts his head, focusing upward, then slightly to the right, as if something above or behind the wall is calling to him. Ethan raises the flashlight, following the dog's line of attention. The beam reveals nothing at first, only rough concrete and rusted bolts. But then, barely visible, there is a seam in the structure that does not match the original construction. A later addition, a hidden modification. Ethan's expression tightens slightly as he realizes the tunnel is not simply empty. It has been altered, and whatever Shadow is sensing is not the past. It is something that was never meant to be found. The deeper Ethan Cole and Shadow move into the abandoned railway tunnel, the more the space begins to feel less like a forgotten structure, and more like a place deliberately sealed away. The air grows still, almost controlled, as if every sound is being absorbed before it can travel back. Ethan keeps his flashlight steady, scanning the uneven walls where layers of old concrete meet sections that appear subtly different in texture and age. Shadow walks ahead now, no longer hesitant, but fully committed to a direction that neither hesitation nor doubt can interrupt. His steps are slow and deliberate, stopping occasionally to listen, then continuing as if following an invisible thread only he can perceive. Ethan notices the tunnel markings becoming inconsistent. Old maintenance numbers painted decades ago fade into areas where newer, unrecorded symbols appear faintly etched into the surface. They are not official. They do not match any railroad system he recognizes. He stops briefly to study one of them, brushing away dust with his glove, but the symbol is too worn to fully interpret. Shadow suddenly pauses several feet ahead, standing perfectly still beneath a section of ceiling reinforced with steel supports that look newer than the surrounding structure. Ethan approaches carefully, raising his flashlight. The beam reveals something unexpected. A narrow maintenance hatch partially concealed behind a false panel, its edges scratched and slightly misaligned, suggesting recent or repeated access. There is no official signage, no safety marking, only a faint outline that breaks the continuity of the tunnel's original construction. Ethan's breath slows as he realizes this section of the tunnel does not belong to any public record. Shadow lowers his head toward the base of the wall beneath the hatch, sniffing once before stepping back, as if confirming something important. Ethan kneels and presses his hand against the surface. The wall feels hollow in one section, different from the surrounding solid concrete. A concealed space exists beyond it. He stands slowly, looking up at Shadow, who remains focused on the exact point where structure meets secrecy. A faint metallic echo suddenly travels through the tunnel, distant but precise, like something shifting behind sealed space. It is not random. It follows a pattern that suggests repetition, containment, or movement confined within limits. Ethan takes a step closer to the hatch, but stops again when Shadow moves slightly in front of him, not blocking, but positioning himself as if indicating caution rather than refusal. The German Shepherd turns his head once toward the darkness deeper inside the tunnel, then back toward the hidden structure, as though weighing two paths that both lead toward the same answer. Ethan understands without words that they are no longer simply exploring an abandoned railway line. They are standing at the edge of something intentionally hidden, something constructed after the tunnel was abandoned, something that was never meant to be part of the original history. The flashlight flickers briefly as he adjusts his grip, casting shifting shadows across the reinforced wall and the concealed hatch. In that unstable light, the tunnel feels less empty than before, as if it has been waiting for someone to notice what was never officially there. Shadow exhales softly, steady and certain, confirming what Ethan now fully realizes. Whatever echoes inside this place did not come from the past alone. It is still here. Ethan Cole stands motionless in the narrow section of the abandoned railway tunnel, his flashlight fixed on the concealed maintenance hatch hidden behind the false wall panel. The metal surface is colder than the surrounding concrete, and its edges show signs of repeated, careful use rather than accidental damage. Shadow remains directly in front of him, no longer pacing or exploring, but fully anchored to the space, as if he has become part of its silent structure. His amber eyes remain locked on the hatch without blinking, his posture steady and controlled, signaling awareness rather than fear. Ethan slowly exhales, feeling the weight of the moment deepen around them. The tunnel no longer feels like an empty relic of transportation history. It feels occupied by intention. He reaches out cautiously, placing his gloved hand along the seam where the false panel meets the reinforced frame. The surface gives no sound, but the lack of vibration tells him more than any echo could. This section was not built with public access in mind. It was constructed to remain unnoticed. Behind him, the tunnel stretches into darkness, but the deeper passage no longer holds his attention. Everything now centers on the sealed structure in front of him. Shadow shifts slightly, stepping closer to the wall, lowering his head until his nose nearly touches the base of the hatch. He exhales once, slow and deliberate, then takes a half step back, signaling not retreat, but recognition. Ethan notices a faint marking etched into the lower corner of the metal frame, partially obscured by dust and time. It is not part of any railroad identification system. It appears intentional, but unofficial, as if added quietly after construction was complete. He raises his flashlight for a closer look, tracing the uneven engraving with his eyes. The shape is unclear, but its placement suggests meaning rather than decoration. Suddenly, a low mechanical resonance travels through the tunnel, distant yet structured, like a vibration carried through steel rather than air. Ethan freezes, listening. The sound does not repeat naturally. It follows a controlled rhythm, as if triggered or contained within a system still active somewhere beyond the wall. Shadow reacts instantly, lifting his head toward the source of the vibration, then shifting his attention back to the hatch. His stance tightens, but he does not retreat. Instead, he holds position, as if confirming that the source is directly behind the sealed barrier. Ethan takes a slow step backward, reassessing the tunnel around them. The surrounding structure, once perceived as abandoned, now reveals subtle inconsistencies. Reinforced sections placed after original construction. Clean alignment where decay should have progressed uniformly. Unexplained modifications hidden within a forgotten infrastructure. The realization settles in quietly but firmly. This tunnel was not merely abandoned. It was altered. And whatever exists behind the concealed hatch is not part of history that ended. It is part of something that was intentionally kept going. Ethan Cole remains in front of the concealed maintenance hatch, the weight of discovery, pressing silently through the abandoned railway tunnel. The faint mechanical vibration that passed through the structure moments earlier has faded, but its presence lingers in the air like an afterimage that refuses to disappear. Shadow stands perfectly still, positioned slightly ahead of Ethan now, his body angled toward the sealed wall, as if guarding the point of origin rather than merely observing it. The German Shepherd's focus is absolute, his breathing slow and controlled, ears subtly adjusting to sounds too distant for human perception. Ethan lowers his flashlight slightly, allowing the beam to rest along the seam of the hidden panel. The edges of the structure reveal something he had not noticed before. Tiny scratches along the metal frame, consistent in direction, suggesting repeated access over time rather than a single installation. Whoever built or maintained this section of the tunnel did so with precision and secrecy. Ethan takes a cautious step to the side, scanning the surrounding wall again. The reinforced concrete here is different from the rest of the tunnel. The texture is newer, the coloration slightly inconsistent with decades of aging. This is not decay. It is modification. Shadow suddenly shifts his position, moving closer to the base of the wall where the hatch meets the ground. He lowers his head and exhales once, a steady, controlled breath that signals awareness rather than alarm. Then he turns his head slightly toward Ethan, as if confirming that what they are sensing is shared and real. Ethan crouches beside him, placing his hand on the cold surface again, this time applying gentle pressure along the seam. The panel does not move, but beneath it, he feels a subtle difference in density. There is empty space behind it. Structured space. Not natural cavity, but deliberate construction. A faint metallic echo returns, softer this time, traveling through the tunnel in irregular intervals. It is no longer distant. It feels closer, more localized, as if something inside the sealed space has shifted its position. Ethan straightens slowly, his expression tightening as he considers the implications. If the tunnel had been altered after abandonment, then whatever lies behind this wall may not belong to the original railway system at all. Shadow suddenly steps forward again, this time placing his paw directly against the lower edge of the hatch frame. He holds the position without hesitation, as if indicating certainty. Ethan notices a second marking etched deeper into the metal near the base, partially obscured by grime. It is different from the first, more deliberate, structured in a way that resembles identification rather than decoration. The realization begins to form in Ethan's mind not as a conclusion, but as an unfolding truth. This is not simply a hidden compartment. It is part of a system, a maintained structure concealed within an abandoned one. The tunnel was never fully left behind. It was only sealed from view. Shadow lifts his head slightly, listening once more to the unseen resonance behind the wall. Ethan follows his gaze, and for the first time, he no longer feels like they are searching for something forgotten. Instead, he understands they are standing at the edge of something still in operation, waiting quietly behind sealed steel and silence. Ethan Cole stands in complete stillness inside the abandoned railway tunnel, the concealed maintenance hatch now feeling less like a mystery and more like a threshold separating two different versions of the same place. The faint mechanical resonance that had previously echoed through the structure has not returned, but its absence feels even more intentional than its presence. Silence here is not empty. It is managed, controlled. Shadow remains directly beside the sealed wall, his posture unchanged, but his focus sharpened to an almost unnatural degree. The German Shepherd's amber eyes remain fixed on the lower section of the hatch frame, as if tracking something that moves without sound behind the barrier. Ethan slowly raises his flashlight again, this time tracing the entire outline of the concealed structure with careful precision. The beam reveals subtle irregularities he had not fully registered before, sections of reinforcement that do not match the original tunnel construction, anchor points embedded into the concrete that suggest later modification, and beneath it all, faint alignment marks that indicate repeated calibration or maintenance over time. This is not a forgotten space. It is an actively preserved one. Ethan steps closer, placing his hand flat against the cold metal once more. This time, he applies no pressure. He is listening through contact rather than force. The surface remains still, yet beneath it, he senses a depth that is not physical distance, but structural separation. Shadow suddenly shifts his position again, not in alarm, but in confirmation. He moves parallel to the wall, then stops at a point slightly further down the tunnel, where another seam in the concrete becomes visible under the flashlight's edge. Ethan follows immediately. The second seam mirrors the first in construction, suggesting a connected system rather than isolated modification. 2 points of concealment within the same tunnel section. The realization settles quietly. Whatever lies behind these walls is not a single hidden space. It is a network. Ethan crouches again, examining the second panel. The same subtle markings appear along its edge, faint but deliberate, indicating access points rather than damage. He runs his fingers along the groove and feels a slight temperature difference compared to the surrounding concrete. It is cooler, as if air is circulating from behind it in controlled intervals. A faint pulse of sound returns, softer than before, but structured in rhythm. Not random echo, not environmental noise. Something mechanical, operating at a distance, but still connected to this exact point. Shadow exhales once, steady and calm, then sits directly facing the wall, his body aligned with absolute certainty. Ethan looks at him, then back at the structure. For the first time, he understands that the tunnel itself is no longer the subject of investigation. It is only the surface layer. Beneath it lies something designed to remain invisible while still functioning. A hidden system maintained over time, carefully integrated into an abandoned world to ensure it would never be questioned. Ethan slowly stands, his expression tightening not with fear, but with realization. Whatever is behind these sealed panels is not merely history. It is continuity, and Shadow, without hesitation, has already chosen the direction forward. Ethan Cole remains motionless in front of the twin concealed seams embedded within the abandoned railway tunnel, his flashlight now lowered slightly, as if brightness itself might disturb whatever system lies behind the reinforced concrete. The realization that this structure is not simply abandoned but intentionally maintained continues to settle deeper in his mind. Every detail now feels deliberate rather than decayed. Shadow shifts his position once more, moving away from the second seam and returning to the first, as if comparing 2 points within the same invisible network. His behavior is no longer exploratory. It is confirmatory. Ethan notices the pattern immediately. The dog is mapping something that cannot be seen. Ethan slowly steps back, widening his perspective. From this angle, both concealed panels align along the same structural line within the tunnel wall. This is not random placement. It is engineering, purposeful and repeated. He raises his flashlight higher, tracing the ceiling above both points, and discovers faint metallic conduits running along the upper curvature of the tunnel. They are partially hidden beneath layers of dust and aging concrete, yet their presence contradicts everything about the tunnel's official abandonment records. These conduits suggest active maintenance, or at least preserved infrastructure that has not been allowed to decay naturally. A faint vibration returns, stronger this time, traveling through the floor rather than the air. It is subtle but consistent, like a pulse repeating at measured intervals. Ethan kneels briefly, pressing his hand against the ground near the base of the wall. The vibration is not random. It is directional. Shadow immediately reacts, stepping closer and placing himself between Ethan and the deeper darkness of the tunnel. Not as protection from danger, but as guidance towards certainty. Ethan looks at him carefully. "You know exactly where this leads," he whispers. Shadow does not move, but his focus shifts toward a narrow section further ahead where the tunnel subtly curves out of direct sight. Ethan rises slowly and follows the line of the dog's attention. As they move forward, the tunnel begins to change in subtle ways. The walls become smoother. The spacing between support marks grows more precise. Even the sound of their footsteps seems slightly dampened, as though the space ahead has been designed to absorb external noise. This is no longer abandoned infrastructure. It is controlled space disguised as abandonment. Shadow pauses at the curve, refusing to proceed further until Ethan is directly beside him. The German shepherd's posture tightens slightly, not with fear, but with certainty. Ethan takes a breath and steps forward together with him. Around the bend, the tunnel extends into a section that has clearly been reinforced far more recently than the rest. Industrial-grade metal framing lines the walls, and faint electrical housing units are embedded at intervals along the surface. None of this appears on any visible record Ethan has ever seen. The deeper they go, the more the tunnel resembles a maintained passage rather than a forgotten one. Ethan stops again, scanning the environment. Shadow remains still, eyes fixed forward. A final faint echo travels through the structure, structured and controlled, as if responding to their presence. Ethan realizes with quiet certainty that whatever is hidden here is not dormant. It is aware of movement above its surface. And somewhere deeper inside this engineered silence, something continues to operate exactly as it was designed to do. Ethan Cole stands at the curve of the reinforced railway tunnel, the sense of controlled silence now far more pronounced than when they first entered. The deeper section ahead no longer feels like abandoned infrastructure. It feels maintained, monitored, and deliberately preserved. Shadow remains perfectly still beside him, his posture aligned with the tunnel's forward direction, as if confirming what Ethan is beginning to understand but cannot yet fully accept. The faint mechanical pulse they had detected earlier returns again, subtle but precise, traveling through the tunnel floor in evenly spaced intervals. It is no longer random vibration. It is structured timing. Ethan slowly lowers his flashlight, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darker environment ahead. The tunnel walls here are cleaner, less eroded, and reinforced with newer materials that subtly contrast the older concrete behind them. Embedded along the base of the wall are small access panels, each one sealed with uniform metal plating that does not match any historical railway design. This is not restoration. It is continuation. Shadow takes a single step forward, then stops, his attention locked on one of the panels positioned slightly lower than the others. Ethan approaches carefully, crouching to examine it. The panel has no visible identification markings, only a small recessed seam and faint scratches that suggest repeated but controlled access over time. He runs his fingers along the edge. It is cold, but not dormant. There is a faint resonance beneath the surface, as if something behind it is still active in a low operational state. A soft mechanical hum follows, barely audible, but distinct enough to confirm the presence of functioning systems beyond the sealed layer. Ethan exhales slowly, recognizing the implication. Whatever lies behind these walls is not only hidden but sustained. Shadow suddenly shifts his position again, moving further along the tunnel wall rather than toward the deeper darkness ahead. He stops at another identical access panel, reinforcing the pattern. Ethan follows immediately, now fully aware that these panels are not isolated points. They are part of a distributed system embedded throughout this section of the tunnel. The realization forms gradually but firmly. This tunnel is not a forgotten passage. It is a concealed corridor built within an older structure, designed to remain invisible while still functioning. Ethan raises his flashlight toward the ceiling again, confirming what he suspected earlier. The overhead conduits are not decorative remnants. They connect directly to each access panel below, forming a continuous network running the length of the reinforced section. Shadow stands between two panels now, his body perfectly still, as if marking the center of a larger hidden framework. Ethan steps closer and presses his palm flat against the wall. The vibration he feels is no longer subtle. It is consistent, rhythmic, and directional, confirming that active systems exist behind the barrier. The tunnel itself feels less like an empty structure and more like a shell concealing something operational within. A faint echo travels through the space, structured and repeating, similar to the earlier pulses, but now more localized. Ethan's expression tightens, not from fear, but from realization. This place was not abandoned and forgotten. It was designed to look abandoned, while continuing to function beneath the surface of recorded history. Shadow exhales quietly, then turns his head slightly toward the direction deeper into the tunnel, signaling that whatever they have discovered so far is only the outer layer of something far larger still waiting ahead. Ethan Cole stands motionless in the reinforced section of the abandoned railway tunnel, the weight of realization growing heavier with each structured pulse of vibration that moves through the floor beneath his boots. The tunnel is no longer behaving like an abandoned structure. It is behaving like an active system operating in low visibility mode, hidden beneath layers of forgotten infrastructure. Shadow remains perfectly aligned with the wall, his body angled toward the deeper corridor as if he can feel the entire network extending beyond what Ethan can see. The German Shepherd does not move, but his stillness is no longer passive. It is focused, deliberate, and deeply aware. Ethan slowly lowers his flashlight until the beam rests directly on the nearest access panel. The faint mechanical resonance behind it continues at a steady rhythm, confirming that something within is not only intact but functioning. He crouches and examines the seam again, noticing now that the panel edges are not sealed in a way that suggests permanent closure. They are designed for controlled access, with precision alignment that allows opening without structural damage. This is not abandonment. It is concealment with purpose. Shadow suddenly steps forward, not toward the panel Ethan is examining, but further, down the tunnel where another identical section interrupts the reinforced wall. Ethan follows immediately, his attention now fully shifting to the repeating pattern. Panel after panel extends along the tunnel at measured intervals, each one identical in size, placement, and construction detail. The consistency reveals intentional design rather than random modification, a network rather than isolated concealment points. Ethan raises his flashlight higher, tracing the ceiling line once more. The overhead conduits connect each panel seamlessly, forming a continuous system that runs deeper into the tunnel beyond their current position. Whatever lies behind these walls is not localized. It is distributed, maintained, and synchronized. A faint pulse travels again through the structure, slightly stronger than before, followed by a subtle shift in air pressure that Ethan can feel against his skin. Shadow reacts instantly this time, lifting his head and focusing toward the far end of the tunnel where darkness compresses into a narrowing corridor. Ethan's breathing slows as he follows the dog's line of attention. The deeper section ahead is no longer just reinforced. It appears newer, cleaner, and more deliberately constructed than anything they have encountered so far. The surfaces are smoother, the angles more precise, and the alignment of structural components suggests modern engineering embedded within an older shell. Ethan places his hand against the wall again, but this time the vibration feels different. It is not just rhythmic. It is directional, like a signal traveling forward through connected segments of the tunnel rather than diffusing randomly through stone. He realizes that what they have been following is not simply hidden infrastructure. It is a path, a controlled pathway extending deeper into the mountain system beyond any official map or record. Shadow takes a single step forward and stops again, his body perfectly aligned with the forward direction of the tunnel. His ears remain locked on something unseen, confirming that the source of the pattern lies ahead, not behind. Ethan straightens slowly, tightening his grip on the flashlight as the tunnel stretches forward into engineered darkness. The realization settles fully now, no longer forming as suspicion but as certainty. They are not exploring an abandoned railway tunnel. They are walking inside a concealed system that continues to operate beyond the boundaries of recorded history, and whatever is at the center of it has already become aware that they are here. Ethan Cole stands in the deepest reinforced section of the abandoned railway tunnel, the structured vibration beneath the floor now more consistent, more deliberate, as if responding to their presence rather than continuing independently. The realization that this tunnel is part of a controlled and maintained system no longer feels theoretical. It feels immediate, physical, and unavoidable. Shadow remains several feet ahead, positioned directly in line with the tunnel's forward axis. His posture is unchanged, but his focus has intensified to a level that removes all uncertainty. The German Shepherd is no longer reacting to random stimuli. He is tracking a continuous pattern that extends deeper into the structure. Ethan slowly moves forward again, keeping his flashlight angled low to avoid disrupting the rhythm of the space. The reinforced walls on both sides maintain the same pattern of concealed access panels, but ahead, the spacing begins to shift. The intervals between panels become shorter, more precise, and more symmetrical, suggesting proximity to a central control or convergence point. This is no longer distributed infrastructure. It is narrowing toward a focal system. Shadow suddenly stops without warning. Ethan halts immediately behind him. The tunnel ahead transitions into a section where the walls are no longer simply reinforced, but fully reconstructed. Smooth industrial panels replace aged concrete entirely. Embedded lighting housings, though currently inactive, are integrated into the structure at consistent intervals. The design is modern, deliberate, and unmistakably operational. Ethan scans the environment carefully, his flashlight revealing markings along the base of the wall that resemble coded identifiers rather than maintenance labels. These markings are uniform, repeating, in structured sequences that suggest tracking, segmentation, or compartmentalization within the tunnel system. The mechanical vibration intensifies slightly, no longer felt through the floor alone, but through the surrounding air pressure itself. It arrives in measured pulses, each one identical in duration, suggesting an automated process rather than manual operation. Shadow takes one slow step forward, then another, moving into the reconstructed section without hesitation. Ethan follows closely, his awareness fully heightened. The transition between old tunnel and modern structure is abrupt. Behind them remains the decayed railway passage, but ahead is a fully integrated system hidden beneath it. The air here is different, cleaner, controlled. Ethan notices faint ventilation patterns along the upper wall, subtly regulating airflow. This is not abandonment. It is maintenance under concealment. The tunnel curves slightly, guiding them toward what appears to be a larger chamber or junction ahead. As they move deeper, the rhythmic pulse becomes more defined, aligning with structural points along the walls in a synchronized pattern. It is no longer just vibration. It is coordination. Shadow suddenly pauses again at the edge of the curve. His head tilts slightly, focusing on something beyond visual range. Ethan steps beside him and raises the flashlight carefully. The beam reaches just far enough to reveal a large sealed doorway embedded into the tunnels and structure. It is industrial, reinforced, and significantly newer than anything they have encountered so far. No signage marks its purpose. No official designation identifies its function. Only a single uninterrupted surface stands between them and whatever lies beyond. The structured pulse continues, steady and precise, emanating from behind the sealed doorway. Ethan lowers the flashlight slightly, his expression tightening as understanding settles fully into place. This tunnel was never simply abandoned or modified. It was designed to hide continuity beneath the appearance of decay. Shadow remains still, facing the sealed door without blinking, as if confirming what they have both already realized without needing words. Whatever they have been following has reached its source, and it is still operating on the other side. Ethan Cole stands motionless in front of the sealed industrial door at the deepest point of the abandoned railway tunnel system, the rhythmic mechanical pulse now fully centered behind the barrier. The sound is no longer faint or distant. It is clear, structured, and synchronized, as if multiple systems are operating in coordination on the other side. Shadow remains directly facing the door, his entire posture locked into absolute focus. There is no hesitation in him now, only certainty. Ethan slowly steps closer to the door, raising his flashlight to study its surface. The metal is smooth, reinforced, and far newer than anything in the surrounding tunnel infrastructure. Along its edges are precise locking mechanisms embedded into the frame, designed not for emergency sealing, but for controlled restriction. This is not a forgotten passage. It is an intentional boundary. Ethan runs his hand along the seam where the door meets the frame. The temperature is different here, slightly warmer than the surrounding tunnel, suggesting active systems behind it. The rhythmic pulse intensifies for a brief moment, then stabilizes again, as if reacting to proximity. Shadow suddenly shifts forward, placing himself directly in front of the door, then lowering his head slightly. He exhales once, steady and controlled, as if confirming identity rather than sensing danger. Ethan notices something new at the base of the door. A small recessed panel partially hidden beneath dust and alignment plating. Unlike the previous access points, this one contains faint illuminated indicators, currently dim but not inactive. They suggest power distribution or system readiness, even if dormant. Ethan crouches, studying it carefully. The markings beside the panel are not random identifiers. They are structured codes arranged in repeating sequences, consistent with monitored infrastructure rather than abandoned construction. A faint vibration passes through the door itself, not from impact or external force, but from internal mechanical movement responding at regular intervals. Ethan takes a slow step back, realizing that what they have reached is not simply an endpoint in the tunnel. It is a controlled interface, a separation point between observed space and operational interior. Shadow remains unmoving, his gaze fixed directly on the center of the door. His ears shift slightly, tracking the internal rhythm with absolute precision. Ethan looks around the surrounding tunnel one final time. The reinforced walls, the embedded conduits, the structured access points, all converge here. Every modification they discovered leads directly to this sealed structure. Whatever system exists beyond it is not isolated. It is central. The rhythmic pulse changes again, becoming slightly slower, more deliberate, as if transitioning between operational states. Ethan feels the shift rather than hears it. The entire tunnel seems to recalibrate in response to something on the other side of the door. He exhales quietly, lowering his flashlight. There is no longer uncertainty in the structure of what they have found. Only scale. Shadow takes one final step forward and presses his nose close to the seam of the sealed door. He remains there for several seconds, completely still, before slowly lifting his head. The message in his posture is unmistakable. Whatever lies beyond this barrier is not hidden in the sense of being lost. It is hidden because it is still active, and now it is aware that they are here. Ethan Cole stands in complete silence before the sealed industrial door at the deepest point of the abandoned railway tunnel system, the controlled mechanical pulse behind it now steady and undeniable. The entire structure feels like it has shifted from concealment into awareness, as if the system on the other side is no longer passive but actively maintaining its own state of operation. Shadow remains directly in front of the door, his posture perfectly aligned with the center seam. His body is still, but his attention is absolute, fixed on something beyond human perception, yet fully understood by instinct. Ethan slowly raises his flashlight, letting the beam trace the reinforced frame one final time. Every structural detail now feels deliberate rather than hidden. The locking mechanisms embedded along the edges are not emergency seals or maintenance hardware. They are controlled access points designed for regulated entry. The realization settles fully into Ethan's mind. This is not an abandoned tunnel. It is a sealed operational boundary. He steps closer, carefully studying the recessed control panel near the base of the door. The faint indicators previously dim now show subtle fluctuations, suggesting responsive systems behind the barrier. The panel is not inactive. It is waiting. Shadow suddenly shifts, stepping closer to the exact center of the door, then lowering his head until his nose nearly touches the cold surface. He remains there for several seconds without movement, as if confirming presence on the other side rather than reacting to threat. Ethan crouches beside him, placing his hand flat against the metal. A low, structured vibration passes through the door into his palm. It is no longer irregular. It is coordinated, like a heartbeat synchronized across multiple systems. He withdraws his hand slowly, his expression tightening as the implications become impossible to ignore. Whatever exists beyond this sealed boundary is not dormant infrastructure. It is active, sustained, and responsive. A faint shift in pressure moves through the tunnel air, subtle but noticeable, as if the sealed environment is adjusting to their proximity. Ethan takes a small step back, scanning the surrounding structure again. The reinforced tunnel walls, embedded conduits, and controlled access points all converge precisely at this door. It is not an endpoint of abandonment. It is a node within a larger functioning system. Shadow lifts his head slightly, ears adjusting to a subtle change in the internal rhythm. The pulse behind the door slows for a brief moment, then returns with measured precision, as though recalibrating in response to observation. Ethan exhales quietly, lowering his flashlight until only the faint outline of the door remains visible. There is no confusion left in his expression, only recognition. This structure was never meant to be found, but it was always meant to continue operating. Shadow takes one final step forward and stands directly centered before the sealed door, unmoving. His presence is no longer exploratory or reactive. It is declarative. Ethan looks at him, then at the door, and understands without words that they are no longer investigating something hidden within an abandoned tunnel. They are standing at the threshold of something still alive beneath it, something that has been running in silence long after the world above forgot it ever existed. Shadow stands perfectly centered before the sealed industrial door, his body completely still, as if he has already accepted what lies beyond it without needing proof. Ethan Cole remains just behind him, flashlight lowered, the beam now resting softly on the cold metal surface that separates them from the unknown system beneath the abandoned railway tunnel. The rhythmic mechanical pulse that has followed them since the deeper reinforced section is now directly aligned with the door itself, no longer felt through the tunnel walls, but emanating from the barrier in a steady, controlled cadence that suggests finality rather than warning. Ethan breathes slowly, aware that every layer of concealment they have passed has led precisely to this point, and that nothing about the journey so far has been accidental. Shadow exhales once, steady and calm, then shifts his weight forward by a fraction, pressing his presence closer to the seam of the door. At that exact moment, the faint indicators along the recessed control panel begin to change. What was once dim and inactive now responds with a soft internal glow, as if recognizing proximity rather than command. Ethan steps closer instinctively, watching as the door's locking mechanisms release in a sequence too precise to be manual intervention. There is no sound of force, no mechanical strain, only a smooth disengagement that feels engineered for controlled revelation rather than forced entry. The sealed industrial door slowly begins to open inward, revealing not darkness, but structured illumination from within. The light is soft, diffused, and steady, casting no harsh shadows, only clarity. Ethan instinctively raises his flashlight, but realizes it is no longer needed. Beyond the threshold lies not abandonment, but preservation. A maintained control chamber stretches into view, lined with operational panels, inactive screens that still hold faint residual power, and structured data systems embedded into the walls. The space is clean, organized, and untouched by decay, as if sealed away from time rather than lost to it. Shadow steps forward first, crossing the threshold without hesitation, then pauses just inside, looking back at Ethan as if confirming permission rather than seeking guidance. Ethan follows slowly, his expression shifting from tension to quiet realization as he takes in the environment. Along the far wall, illuminated softly by internal emergency lighting systems, are archive control records and monitoring displays labeled with structured identifiers that correspond to sections of the tunnel above. Ethan moves closer, reading fragmented operational logs that indicate continuous environmental monitoring, structural stabilization protocols, and emergency response systems designed long ago but never deactivated. This was never a forgotten tunnel. It was a protected infrastructure layer, concealed beneath abandonment, to ensure uninterrupted function without public awareness. Shadow moves further into the room, stopping beside a central console where faint system indicators still pulse in synchronized rhythm, mirroring the same pattern they had felt throughout the tunnel. Ethan stands quietly, realizing that every step they took through darkness was not exploration of the past, but movement through a living system that had continued operating long after the world above stopped acknowledging its existence. The final truth settles without shock, only clarity. What echoed inside the tunnel was not emptiness, but continuity, carefully hidden, carefully maintained, and now finally revealed.